At the beginning, 13.7 billion years ago, a phenomenon we now call the Big Bang began. This single event was the genesis of all matter and life in the universe. Within 10 to the minus 34 of a second, that's 100th of a billionth of a trillionth of a second in age, a singularity that seemed to pop out from nowhere had expanded by 90 times its size and created all the elementary particles needed to build a universe. During the first 3 minutes of the universe, the light elements were born in a process known as Big Bang nucleosynthesis. Temperatures cooled from 1032 Kelvin to 109 Kelvin, and protons and neutrons collided to make deuterium, an isotope of hydrogen. Fast forwarding through 13.2 billion years, and we observe the formation of the stars, and then the galaxies. The Milky Way is formed, and roughly 4.3 billion years ago, on a far-flung spiral, our home, planet Earth, starts to form. A fiery ball that will soon host and take part in all of human history. Millions and billions of years pass, the planets cool, and the oceans form. At an estimated 3 billion years BC, single-cell structures form in the oceans, then multicell, then small creatures. We will stop at 600 million years BC. This is where our particular story begins. The creature you're looking at here is the humble sea squirt. The sea squirt has evolved within itself the endocannabinoid receptor system to control how much water goes in and out of its siphon. The endocannabinoid system was only recently discovered in mammals in 1992 by Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, as well as researchers Willem Duvan and Dr. Lumahans. They discovered the first naturally occurring endogenous cannabinoid, or endocannabinoid, anandamide. Anandamide is a fatty acid neurotransmitter and was named from the Sanskrit word anada, meaning joy or bliss. Previously, in 1963, Dr. Raphael Mechoulam discovered the structure of delta-9 THC, and in 1988, Dr. William Duvan discovered the protein receptor sites CB1 and CB2 in the brain and throughout the body.
Also, I was surprised at the amount of work that's currently being done and has been done on what's called the human endocannabinoid system. And it may not be known that all humans produce cannabis, if you like, in their brain. It's a natural product called the endocannabinoid system. We produce cannabis-like compounds which have a profound effect on many aspects of our behavior, on pain, on motor control, movement control, on growth and adaptability of the brain, potentially on cancer, on mood, on memory. It's a fascinating system.
And this is the largest neurotransmitter network in our body that was only discovered in 1988, so it's relatively speaking, a very recent knowledge. And the endocannabinoid system consists of receptors. There are two types of receptors identified so far. Receptors in the brain, in the immune system, in our gut, and in most organs in the body. The receptors is the first element. The second elements are ligands or microscopic amounts of chemicals or fats, oils or fats, which are called endocannabinoids. And the third element of the endocannabinoid system are enzymes. The enzymes are responsible for manufacturing the endocannabinoids in the first place or helping with them to break down. So these three components working together are the endocannabinoid system. And the reason it's called the endocannabinoid system is because these cannabinoids, these endocannabinoids, are remarkably similar. They're not exactly the same, but they're remarkably similar to the cannabinoids that you find in the cannabis plant.
Anandamide fits the CB1 and CB2 receptor sites like a key in a lock. As well as being a mood enhancer, anandamide helps control height, weight, and reproduction, amongst other things in the body. Leaving the sea squirt behind, we move forward 566 million years in time to 34 million years BC. Here, In the mountains of Kazakhstan, the cannabis plant has evolved from Humulus lupulus, or more commonly known as the hops plant, the flower of which is still used to this day in the brewing process for beer. Evolving at such high elevation presented the plant with many unique environmental pressures. To better survive the high UV radiation levels, low oxygen and increased predators, cannabinoids such as THC were used to retain water, reflect sunlight and ward off predators. Tetrahydrocannabinoid, or THC, is the most famous cannabinoid and the one responsible for the plant's psychoactive effect. THC was discovered by Dr. Raphael Mechoulam in the 1960s by separating the compounds of the plant and testing each individually on animals and then humans. Noticing that only one gave a sedative effect, Mechoulam discovered the psychoactive compound responsible for the marijuana high. The naturally occurring chemical compound, THC, found in the cannabis plant, has a different chemical makeup but fits the CB1 and CB2 receptor sites perfectly, magnifying the mood-enhancing effect normally caused by indigenous cannabinoids such as anandamide. It is not just anandamide and THC that act on these receptors. There are many other cannabinoids and endocannabinoids that act directly or indirectly, such as 2-AG, CBD, CNB, and THCA, amongst others, and each has a different effect on the body.
So the cannabis plant, and the reason the cannabis plant has a therapeutic response in living organisms, has a physiological impact on users, creates an emotional response, has to do with the fact that it has multiple unique biologically and physiologically active compounds in the plant. The two most prevalent compounds that we find in the cannabis plant are tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, and the other being CBD, cannabidiol. Now, they are far from the only active constituents in the marijuana plant, but again, they're the ones that we find most prevalent in the plant.
Over the next 34 million years, man will evolve from primates, and nearly 99% of all species that ever existed have been wiped out. 8,000 years BC, the plant has gone through many changes, and a relatively new species, roughly 250,000 years old, has become the top predator and the first to drastically manipulate its environment through thought, desire, and determination. A major leap forward will be the agriculture of crops. This will lead to an explosion in technology, the ability for humans to live in groups larger than 150, and is the basis of modern civilization. For now, we are in an ancient village located in an area of modern-day Taiwan. From this village, archaeologists have found hemp cord used in pottery. Hemp refers to strains of Cannabis sativa that have been bred specifically for its fibers and not for its psychoactive effect. This is the oldest known use for the plant and marks the beginning of human agricultural crops. In 1977, Carl Sagan stated that marijuana may actually have been the world's first agricultural crop, leading to the development of civilization itself. 6000 BC, China. Cannabis is recorded for its seeds and oil used in food. 5000 BC, India. Stems were used for fiber to make cloth, its fruit for food and oil, and its resin for medicine. 2737 BC, Emperor Zhang Yang of China is recorded for prescribing marijuana tea for the treatment of malaria, rheumatism, gout, to help with the sharpening of memory, increased eloquence, and the stimulation of appetite. The plant's popularity as a medicine spreads throughout Asia, the Middle East, and down the eastern coast of Africa. Ancient physicians prescribed marijuana for everything from pain relief to earache to childbirth. Throughout the world, cannabis is quickly becoming a wonder treatment for hundreds of ailments and disorders. Its popularity seems unstoppable. 1550 BC, Egypt. By 1550 BC, ancient Egyptians were very aware of the medical properties of cannabis, in some ways, way surpassing our modern knowledge. The Apis papyrus was written around this time period and is one of the oldest complete medical texts discovered so far. The book mentions medical compounds containing hemp for many medical problems, including inflammation, glaucoma, hemorrhoids, epilepsy, to wave off depression and other psychological problems, and even in the treatment of cancer. It was noted that cannabis was not a cure, but treatment to help with the symptoms of the ailments. The mummy of Ramesses II that was excavated in 1881 was found to have traces of cannabis in its remains. Since then, many mummies that have been exhumed have shown similar traces of the plant in their system, indicating that cannabis was part of the culture and everyday life in ancient Egypt. Sehat, the goddess of wisdom, is depicted here with a colourful cannabis leaf above her head. These depictions date back from thousands of years ago. 207 BC, China. The Han Dynasty periods. Hemp was being mixed with mulberry tree bark to make a low-cost, durable paper used by the masses. The Old Testament mentions cannabis in the recipe for the holy anointing oil. Exodus 30, verses 22 to 23. The healer of a local renown will infuse 9 pounds of a plant known in Aramaic as Cannabis, the fragrant cane, into about 6 quarts of olive oil, along with essential extracts of myrrh, cinnamon, and cassia. Cannabis has been translated to mean cannabis, rendered from the traditional Hebrew word cannabis. Interestingly, the first time the word cannabis is mentioned in the Bible is in relation to Moses and the burning bush, when God gives him the recipe for the holy anointing oil. The Roman Empire traded in hemp. They imported it from the far-flung corners of their empire and distributed it around the world. They used it for rope, sails, clothes, paper, food, and medicine, amongst others. The demand was such that the whole empire was in constant production and could never produce enough. The power of the Roman Empire made the plant commonplace across the globe. AD 160, Greek physician Claudius Galen writes for the first time in Europe about the plant's psychoactive effect. Galen noted that hemp cakes, if eaten in moderation, produced a feeling of well-being, but taken to excess, they led to intoxication and dehydration. AD 400, hemp is cultivated in the UK. With the fading of the Roman Empire, Europe begins to grow its own hemp to replace the Roman imports. The Vikings used hemp in nearly all aspects of life, from clothes to sails on their ships. 900 AD, Arabs learned techniques for making paper, using the same techniques that the Chinese used thousands of years before them. By the 12th century, this paper-making knowledge was taken to Europe. As early as the 10th century, the Persian medical writer Alan Musaka recommended that the juice of the hemp leaves be poured into the nose to prevent seizures. In the 15th century, the polymath Ali Baradi claimed that the epilepsy of the son of the Caliphate's chamberlain was successfully treated with cannabis resin. 1533, England. King Henry VIII issues a royal proclamation that farmers must put land aside for the growth of hemp. Countries such as India, China, and the African colonies are chosen for their hemp growing potential. As the British Empire grows and the demand for ropes, sails, fishing line, oil, paper, medicine, and clothes increases. 1753. The Swedish botanist Carlos Linnaeus names the plant cannabis for the first time, more specifically Cannabis sativa, from the Latin meaning cultivated. He based the word on cannabis, an old Greek word for hemp. In 1764, medical marijuana appears in the New England dispensary. In 1840, Britain, Sir J.R. Reynolds, chief physician to Queen Victoria, prescribes medical marijuana to the Queen to aid with her menstrual cramps. In Victorian Britain, medical cannabis was being used for ailments such as muscle spasms, rheumatism, and epilepsy. Studies in 1840 by French doctor Jacques Joseph Moreau found that marijuana suppresses headaches, increases appetite, and aided people to sleep. By 1850 in America, cannabis-based medicines are available. The US Pharmacopedia lists its use for over 100 separate illnesses and diseases, including pain management, as a cold treatment, neuralgia, tetanus, typhus, cholera, rabies, dysentery, alcoholism, opiate addiction, anthrax, leprosy, incontinence, gout, compulsive disorders, tonsillitis, insanity, excessive menstrual bleeding, and uterine bleeding, amongst others. Cannabis, a simple plant classified as a weed, a plant that has an almost symbiotic relationship with humans. We disperse it around the planet and it repays us with medicine, food, oil, and strong natural fibers. A plant that has shaped the modern world like no other before it is about to be systematically made illegal around the Western world. Thousands of years of cultivation, medicine, paper, and clothing is about to come to an end, along with a safe, powerful medicine. By 1914 in America, in response to the influx of Mexican immigrants who used cannabis for its psychoactive properties rather than the medical use, the Harrison Act in the US defined the use of marijuana as a crime. By 1915, cannabis begins to be prohibited for non-medical use all across the United States. By 1927, the prohibition is complete.
If we look at the origins of cannabis prohibition in this country, they really begin with the stigmatization of certain races that were believed to be using cannabis. And even today, those stereotypes continue to exist. They continue to be perpetuated. This is really part of a larger cultural and class warfare in our society, and actually has very little to do with marijuana itself.
In 1928, recreational use of cannabis is banned in Britain. Cannabis was made illegal in the United Kingdom on the 28th of September 1928 as an addition to the Dangerous Drugs Act 1920. However, doctors were able to prescribe cannabis for medical use until exactly 43 years later, when, on September 28, 1971, the Misuse of Drugs Act was introduced. In 1936, the American propaganda film Reefer Madness was produced to scare the American youth away from cannabis. The film incited that cannabis causes madness and turns men into rapists.
Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell.
Here's the word of warning to both old and young. Pay heed to me before it is too late. There's a vicious plant that looks so innocent, but its stem comes from the roots of hate. Marijuana, the devil's flower. If you use it, you'll be his slave. Marijuana, it brings you sorrow and may send you to your grave.
1937, US Congress passes the Marijuana Tax Act, which criminalizes the drug. In response, William C. Warwood, testifying on behalf of the AMA, told Congress that, quoting, The American Medical Association knows of no evidence that marijuana is a dangerous drug, and warned that a prohibition loses sight of the fact that future investigations may show that there are substantial medical uses for cannabis. His comments were ignored by Congress. As part of the testimony for Congress to pass the 1937 Act derived from articles in newspapers owned by William Randolph Hearst, who had a significant final interest in the timber industry that manufactured his newspaper. In 1941, cannabis is removed from the US Pharmacopedia, and its medical use is no longer recognized in America. So where are we now? Present day. The plant is still illegal across most of the world. Pharmaceutical companies fill the medical gap with synthetic and toxic drugs. Oil is being pumped from the oceans. Our paper is inferior, and hemp can produce 4 times the yield in a comparable time frame. The worst of these is the removal of a safe medicine. 600 years ago, the Arabs were treating childhood epilepsy successfully with cannabis. Today, in a world of overwhelming technological advancements, our children and adults are placed on a plethora of toxic drugs that have little to no effect, and in most cases are highly addictive.
My name's Charlotte Caldwell. I have a little boy called Billy who has a condition called intractable epilepsy, and he's also on the highest spectrum of autism. Billy, intractable epilepsy is just that his seizures cannot be controlled by epilepsy medications or by diet. He's also a status epileptic, which means that when Billy goes into a seizure, he can't come back out on his own. Any type of seizure in a child is a very, very dangerous, but in Billy's case, the status epilepticus, Billy's then required a rescue med each time that he went into a status seizure, and he also goes blue and requires oxygen. He also then at that stage had just developed this where he would only take his seizures at night, which again is a real dangerous form. He was taking them in his sleep. I tried to access an evaluation, an urgent medical evaluation here in our own country, but to no avail. Was told it would be 6 to 9 months waiting list. In March 2006, when Billy was sent home to die the first time with his condition epilepsy, I had found at that stage what's called as a pediatric hepatologist in Chicago called Professor Nordley, and he had saved Billy's life. After numerous tests, when we arrived in California and there was numerous tests done on Billy, they discovered a lesion in his left temporal lobe. They looked at the lesion through many different scans. The lesion, the left temporal lobe actually controls your speech and memory, and in Billy's case it would have been most likely, if they were to proceed with surgery, that they would have had to have removed all of his left temporal lobe, which would have meant that Billy would have lost his speech and his memory, hence his ability to walk, pick up his toys, drink from his cup, etc. So after a long discussion with Billy's hepatologist, and we considered the fact that Billy had been through many anti-epileptic medications, we discussed medicinal cannabis, and I said, yes, let's give it a go. What have we got to lose? So Billy started first on CBD. With the doctor's advice, he had to establish whether Billy was a CBD responder or not. We tried a couple of different forms of CBD oils till we eventually found one that was looking like it was working for Billy. It was microdosed, very small doses, slowly over a period of time, and I think probably the first time I actually realised that the CBD was actually working for Billy was when he was still having the same amount of seizures, but the length of the seizure was actually reducing, which was amazing for me. Even to get him to that stage where he had a reduction in the length of his seizures was just absolutely amazing, because that meant that Billy didn't need a rescue med, which was just fantastic for me, because a lot of the time he suffered quite badly from the side effects of the rescue medication. He then started to, I noticed with him as well, his eye contact getting a lot better, becoming more aware of his surroundings, noticing things more, paying more attention to me, more attention to his books, his toys, jigsaws, etc. It was like his brain was making connections that I had never seen before. And but the really, really great part about it for me as well as Billy's mummy was that I was seeing, it was almost like I was meeting my new son. It was like Billy had lived with me and I had been his mummy for 11 years. But I was starting to see a different Billy. It was like meeting a new son. It was just an amazing feeling. And every week that went past, the seizures then started to reduce in quantity, and he started to improve in all aspects of his physical ability and his mental ability. To finally, we got him where we couldn't go any higher on the CBD, but we had got Billy to 98% seizure free, which was absolutely incredible.
We found good evidence, not quite as overwhelming, but good evidence for a variety of other indications. One was epilepsy, and particularly children with various forms of childhood-resistant epilepsy. It can work wonders for them. It can actually stop people having several tens of seizures each day. So that's a remarkable effect in some people, but not in everybody. But more studies need to be done on that indication.
Yeah, kids with epilepsy, yeah, I think we probably have about 3-4 kids that parents come in and they buy tinctures, and you know, the doctor told them, hey, start with the low doses, and they come in and buy them, and they literally, you see them like every week, and they're like, it's so much better than giving them like 10 pills a day, and you know, hurting their stomach, and you know, and not only that, just the price itself.
The other indication was for Parkinson's disease. Surprisingly, there's been some very good individual examples of cannabis really stopping profound movements in Parkinson's disease, and can be dramatically helpful for some people. But the evidence that it is across the spectrum is still rather lacking. And again, it simply means those studies haven't been done to confirm what helps, what dosage, what type of cannabis, how often you have to take it, what form you have to take it in. It's those studies that are lacking. It clearly helps many people with Parkinson's, but the evidence is still a little bit thin on the ground to sort of formally recommend it.
My name is Ian Frizzell. I have early onset Parkinson's disease. I was formally diagnosed in 2011, but I've been suffering symptoms since about 1995. The main symptom that I suffer due to Parkinson's is tremor, which affects all 4 limbs, my neck, my jaw and my tongue. Aside from tremor, I have dystonia in my feet, which causes my toes to curl under my foot, and muscular stiffness and weakness. Those are all motor symptoms. Of the non-motor symptoms, lack of motivation is the worst and most debilitating symptom that I have. There are many other minor symptoms, such as loss of sense of smell, but those are my major symptoms. My life has changed quite dramatically since diagnosis. I had decided to retire from being a computer consultant and do a little property development to keep me busy and to earn a crust. I'd just bought this cottage as a renovation product and had completely gutted it. I then had symptoms that I didn't relate to my tremor, which I'd suffered with mildly for many years. I lacked energy, was falling asleep during the day, had no motivation, and all of these things turned out to be due to my Parkinson's. My symptoms have become more pronounced following some dental work, which led to my diagnosis with PD. These days I do not work, I simply don't have the energy, and I'm constantly battling a lack of motivation, which is one of the non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's. I came to use cannabis through researching natural tremor control on the internet. There were various foods that were said to be high in dopamine, but I tried them and got no benefit. I came across a number of accounts of people with Parkinson's using cannabis to calm tremor. I was getting desperate at this stage, so I asked a friend who I knew used cannabis recreationally if he could get me some to try. I smoked a little and the effects were almost instant. It gave me a 90 to 95% reduction in tremor. As a bonus, it also relieved my dystonia and helped with my speech. I've used it ever since. Yeah, as soon as you vape the cannabis, you do get the hit. So immediately you feel a slight rush, and then sort of 5 or 10 minutes later, the relaxation kicks in, and I just feel the tremor melt away, really.
Yes, I've personally seen cannabis working. The most dramatic I've seen is in the context of Parkinson's disease, where people can have, as a side effect of medication or as part of the Parkinson's disease itself, they can have quite profound tremors and sometimes even wild movements of the arms, and you can give cannabis and it can stop those movements. So that's the most dramatic and short-term immediate impact.
So what's the science here? The endocannabinoid system is the largest neurotransmitter network in our bodies. The main function of the endocannabinoid system is homeostasis. Homeostasis is a concept that most biological systems are actively regulated to maintain conditions within a narrow range. Homeostasis is the regulations of the body's functions and has been compared to the concept of the Goldilocks zone, deriving from the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, where Goldilocks prefers the just right porridge, not too hot and not too cold, just the right balance of both. This expression is used mainly to show a planet, like Earth, that is just the right distance from the Sun to sustain life, a position that is just right. Our body's conditions need to be just right for our cells to maintain an optimum performance. The body's endocannabinoid system is a vital system for helping to maintain homeostasis. It helps the cells stay in their Goldilocks zones, often referred to as the modulation effect. This gives us a very good insight as to how cannabis, CBD and THC stop or calm epileptic or Parkinson's fits and tremors. In one example, endocannabinoids are created when an overactive neuron fires excessively, such as in the case with epilepsy. The neurons connected that are not affected will send endocannabinoids to lower the activity and bring the cell back to the Goldilocks zone. In cases of severe epilepsy, the endocannabinoids are too weak and too few to overcome this imbalance, coupled with the fact that metabolic enzymes such as FAAH and MAGL quickly break down anandamide and 2-AG, shortening their effects. CBD and THC are like a steroid shot to the endocannabinoid system, having a much stronger effect than the endocannabinoids themselves. CBD and THC are FAAH and MAGL resistant, meaning that their effects last longer and are more pronounced. CBD also prolongs the effects of endocannabinoids such as anandamide. This is why the flavor of foods, especially those containing milk, such as chocolate and cakes, etc., are hyper-exaggerated whilst on cannabis. The anandamide breakdown is delayed by the CBD and the THC, meaning its blissful effects last longer. In turn, the modulation effects last longer and afflictions such as fits and tremors reach a point of homeostasis quicker and are maintained for longer. Although cannabis is not a cure for epilepsy or Parkinson's, it is an effective treatment, and it is so safe it can be used by children without any known negative side effects. The endocannabinoid system is often only activated where and when it is needed. So when CBD is taken, it goes, in a sense, straight to where the problem is located.
The cannabis oil, again, it was a very slow process. Has eye contact, Billy would have never ever given you full-on eye contact. In fact, just completely would have avoided you at all costs. He is more interested in his surroundings, more interested in me, looking at me. And a big thing for me was he wants to interact with me now. He didn't know how to interact, but now he will sit up beside you, come and sit down in the seat beside you, sit up at the table beside you, he will hug you. He wants to interact with you. He started this thing as well lately of coming and looking straight into your face and staring into your face, which I find hilarious. I remember the first time he did it, which was absolutely the most amazing feeling in the world. And it made me also realise that there was a little boy in there, and he was wanting to come out, and he was going to come out. I just had to keep doing what I was doing with the medicinal cannabis, because it was just making him start to express himself, and it was just such an amazing feeling as a mummy after 11 years not having any of that, and then all of a sudden he wants to do that with me. So it was an amazing positive moment.
I think that current legislation in regards to cannabis verges on the criminal. Although there aren't, to my knowledge, any studies which prove the case for medicinal use of cannabis for Parkinson's, and healthcare professionals will tell you that it is unproven, those same healthcare professionals do know, and some have admitted, that it can be useful in some cases. I'm one of those cases. I've asked repeatedly over the last 2 or 3 years to be prescribed cannabis, only to be told they're unable to do so. Yet those same healthcare professionals are quite happy to prescribe powerful drugs with unpleasant known side effects, which they know do not help my symptoms. That's just got to be wrong.
When we think about the medical benefits of cannabis, we really need to understand what they are based on. And it turns out that the human body endogenously, our own body, produces identical or virtually identical compounds to what you find in the cannabis plant. And the neurotransmitter system that produces and regulates those compounds is called the endocannabinoid system. It's present in your brain, it's present in your organs, it's present in your skin, it's present in upwards of 90% of your body. And wherever the endocannabinoid system is, its purpose is the same, which is to maintain or restore homeostasis, your body's natural balance. So cannabis is good for just about anything that ails you. And you know, in the beginning, when I started talking about cannabis, we didn't even know about the endocannabinoid system. And people would just say, oh, that hippie is crazy. He thinks cannabis is good for everything, right? Well, it turns out that cannabis is, because what it does is it has this modulating effect where it restores your body's natural balance. The best example of the modulating effect of cannabis that I can give comes out of an Israeli nursing home study where something like 100 elderly nursing home patients were supplied with cannabis. And all of them reported improved sleep, decrease in nightmares, right? But the really interesting thing was that those who were overweight dropped weight and came closer to their ideal body mass index. And those who were underweight gained weight and came closer to their ideal body mass index. This is the modulating effect of cannabis. The endocannabinoid system is the explanation for why cannabis is good for reducing cancer tumors, easing epileptic seizures, quelling depression, alleviating anxiety and insomnia, mitigating chronic pain. There are just an incredibly wide range of medical uses for cannabis. So 20 years from now, my prediction is that the rediscovery and the renaissance of medical cannabis will be looked upon as the most important medical development since the discovery of germ theory.
So there has long been interest in the relationship between cannabis and cancer. For many decades, it was presumed or it was opined that cannabis might play a role in causing cancer. Cancer of the lungs, cancer of the upper aerodigestive tract, for instance. And what we've seen over time is that the data has never substantiated that fear. What is known today is that the use of cannabis, even long-term, does not seem to be associated with the diagnoses of the sort of tobacco-related cancers that many people expected. And in fact, some of those studies have shown that people that use cannabis are actually less likely to be diagnosed with some of these diseases compared to people who don't use marijuana at all. So that's been a very interesting finding, and it's led some scientists to further look into this question of whether cannabis, or again the constituents in the cannabis plant, might actually play a role in cancer prevention or in mitigating the spread of cancer. Now, we have preliminary data, we have cell studies, we have animal models that show that cannabinoids clearly can kill cancer cells. We know the mechanism of action, and we have seen these results consistently, again, in petri dishes, in animal models. Of course, the $64 question is whether cannabis would provide those same sort of results and activity in humans with cancer, and we don't know the answer to that question. We know that cannabinoids can trigger apoptosis, which is programmed cell death in malignant cancer cells in animals. We know that it can do that in a petri dish. We don't know the dosage that would be required to safely and effectively achieve those same sort of results in humans. And it's unfortunate we don't know, because absent the long-standing politicization of cannabis, we probably would know the answer to that question today.
My name's Lynn Coxon. I've got breast cancer. I was diagnosed on the 28th of June this year with a grade 3 aggressive tumour, estrogen positive, HER2 negative, with extensive lymph node involvement under my arm and in my neck. I found a lump and went to see my GP, and she said it was a cause for concern and referred me to the breast care unit. I was lucky to get an appointment the following morning, so by 10 o'clock the next day I knew that I had breast cancer because I could see it on the scan. She showed it to me, and I obviously said, "Is it a cyst?" And she said no, and I said, "So is it cancer?" She said yes. The tumour was big, it looked enormous, and there was extensive lymph node involvement under my arms and in my neck. I saw the consultant on the Tuesday, and he told me that the tumour was 33 millimetres, but it hadn't spread anywhere else, it was just in my lymph nodes. And he told me I would need 8 rounds of chemotherapy, followed by a lumpectomy or a mastectomy, and then radiotherapy. So I went away, and I did lots of reading and research because I just wanted to know what I could do for me. Because the thing with cancer is it takes away your control. You're not in control anymore, and I don't find that very easy. So I did a lot of research, and I knew about cannabis oil, CBD oil, because of someone that we'd helped through work. And she got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and chemotherapy hadn't worked. It hadn't killed the cancer so that she could actually have a bone marrow transplant, and they sent her home to die. Her family got her onto CBD oil, and when she went back for her scan, A, they weren't expecting to see her, and B, she was cancer-free and able to have that bone marrow transplant. And everything I read and online, and I got some books as well, just reinforced the fact that CBD cannabis oil seemed to work. And I thought, I'm going to give this a go. So on the 7th of July, I started to take it. I was seeing the consultant again on the 24th of July, and he described the lump then as palpable, which meant that it was soft. Well, it hadn't been soft. It felt like the corner of a table. And from then on, I couldn't actually feel this lump at all. So it came to 2 days before I was due to start my chemotherapy. And I rang the hospital and said, you know, I can't feel this lump anymore. Can I have another ultrasound scan? And they said no. So I rang my GP, and she referred me to the local Nuffield hospital. and I had a private scan which I paid for. What I didn't know was that the radiologist who did the scan actually was part of the breast care team, and he had my original scans. He'd asked for them. So I could see him doing it. I could see on the screen that there was still some tumour there. And he said, well, actually, it's smaller. So I said, how much smaller? And he said, all in good time. Well, when he'd finished, his eyes were like saucers, and he said, it shrunk. Do you mind if I do a mammogram? And I said, no, of course I don't. So he did a mammogram and then took me in the office and showed me. And the original tumour, 33 millimetres, was now 11 millimetres. And the lymph nodes, which had been 25 millimetres, so they were big like grapes, were down to 10. And the mammogram, whereas before the tumour was like a pebble, it was just hazy. So the whole density of it had changed completely. So obviously then I didn't really know what to do, because I was due to start chemo on the Wednesday. And in the end I had to go down to the hospital on the Wednesday morning and see the breast care team and say, look, what am I doing? I don't know what to do now. And so they deferred my chemotherapy, and I saw the consultant the following week after they'd discussed me at their management team meeting. And he said, obviously it's amazing, this is amazing, but as clinicians, we have to tell you that we recommend that you have chemotherapy. So I said to him, okay, with a grade 3 aggressive tumour, left 8 weeks, what would you have expected to see on that scan? And he said, well, it wouldn't have shrunk. So I said, okay, if I'm prepared to take the risk, will you monitor me? And he said, yes, we'd be delighted to. And so that's what's happened since. So now I'm down to about 5 millimetres, and it's not a lump as such, it's 5 millimetres of cancer cells.
I could show you so much history, and you know, the one that just totally burns me up is cannabis and cancer, right? Now we know, I've seen it with my own eyes, and you can go talk to, you know, Professor Guzman from the University of Madrid and a whole army of other scientists who have established that cancer, that cannabis stops the growth of cancer tumors, right? So this isn't new information. The National Institute on Drug Abuse knew this in 1974. They ran a study in 1974 that was designed to show that cannabis causes cancer. The results came back showing the opposite. Cannabis actually fights cancer. What did they do? They buried the study. Not only did they bury the study, they didn't refer it to anybody, they didn't send it to the National Cancer Institute, they did nothing, right? 3 years later, they did it again. Another study designed to show that cannabis causes cancer. Same exact results, right? Same exact results in both categories, the scientific results and what they did with it. So again, it goes into the dustbin, right? And then several years later, they do a third study, this time on lung cancer, right? And they figure, lung cancer, smoke causes cancer, we've got them this time, right? They hired a doctor named Dr. Donald Tashkin to do the Tashkin study. Tashkin examined the rates of lung cancer amongst cannabis smokers, tobacco smokers, and non-smokers. He found the lowest rate of cancer incidence in cannabis smokers, the second lowest rate in non-smokers of anything, and of course the highest rate in tobacco smokers. And there's a very simple reason for that. Despite the tar and other carcinogenic substances that are in any smoke, the cannabinoids that were in the cannabis smoke were so strong, they fought cancer so effectively that they not only completely outweighed the smoke, right, but pushed it in the other direction of prevention.
My name's Jacqueline Ritchie. I suffer from breast cancer. I had the genetic BRCA1, which usually gives you tumours of very rare cancers. So I had triple negative metaplastic cancer, which is a really rare cancer. And on the other breast, I had another cancer, HER2 positive breast cancer. The symptom of the cancer that I had was just a lump on my breast. And then when I went to the doctors and had a mammogram, they discovered a lump on the other breast as well. And because I had bilateral breast cancer, they realised there was a possibility I would have the genetic BRCA gene, so I was tested as well. The treatment I've had is a radical double mastectomy and chemo regime for the 2 different types of cancers. The effects of chemotherapy for me, the first time I had chemotherapy, were terrible. I could hardly breathe, I could hardly move. I walked about everywhere with a plastic bag like this. Before I started chemotherapy, I already had a couple of immune system problems. I had Raynaud's syndrome, which is bad blood circulation in the fingers and toes, and I already had IBS. I was chemical intolerant, so I did have IBS flare-ups. Once chemo started, that was all a lot worse. It exacerbated everything. So constant white feet, constantly freezing. Originally, I used cannabis when I was younger to treat anxiety, and I suffered anorexia when I was younger as well. So I'd used it to treat that when I was younger. So I'd already a big realisation about the plant being used medicinally, but I didn't realise about the cancer. It wasn't until I started researching it that I started realising I had done quite a lot of research with regards to the cannabis plant and different types of cancer. So I started doing all the research on that. I actually managed to get in touch with Rick Simpson. Yeah, I managed to get in touch with him through a Facebook page. So there was a correspondence there, and he just directed me where I needed to go and watch the movie, what strains I would need to grow, how it needs to be grown, how to decarboxylate it into the oil that I need, all the equipment that I need to do it. He more or less handed me all the information that I needed. The day that I was diagnosed, I started looking to see if I could actually get some cannabis oil, and I did manage to get small amounts of cannabis oil. And because I'd managed to get small amounts of cannabis oil, I actually put my surgery off. They wanted to do surgery immediately because of the 2 different types of cancer. So I put the surgery off until May, and from February to May I used oil whenever I could get it, but it was quite sporadic. So I ended up running out of oil and the tumour started growing. Up to that point I'd actually managed to reduce the tumour quite a bit, and the pain from the tumour had disappeared as well. I wasn't getting pain from the tumour. Because I couldn't procure any more oil, I ended up surgery, radical double mastectomy in May. But from the time that I had the surgery, I already had oil sitting waiting for me at that point, because from more or less just after I was diagnosed, I actually started growing a couple of plants. So I knew if I put things off a bit that I would have my own oil ready by the time I started chemotherapy. So I used my own oil by the time the second chemotherapy treatment had happened. It was my own oil that I had then, that I had researched the strain. So I had the surgery on May and chemotherapy started in July. So like I said, from the second chemotherapy for all the rest of the chemotherapy all the way through, I took oil. And I have the pathology from my mastectomy, and the really rare cancer that I had that was nearly a 5 centimetre tumour, the majority of it was actually necrotic tissue. There was just a few cancer cells in the inside of that. And from the prognosis they gave me from that pathology, they had my rates of recurrence within the next 2 years at nearly 100%. I'm sitting at over 3 years now, and I haven't had a recurrence yet as far as I know. Just before my last chemo, I had an appointment with an oncologist. And at that point, the oncologist had said to me that they'd found a skull and a liver lesion. And at that point, I was sitting thinking to myself, chemotherapy obviously hasn't worked, and I need to up my oil intake because I need to sort this out. And I said to my oncologist then, I'm just going to do 1 more chemotherapy, and that's my chemotherapy regime finished. I don't want any more allopathic treatment. I'm going to be to treat my skull and liver lesion with diet, supplements and oil. And when I finished chemotherapy, I still had a skull and liver lesion. A month later, when I went down to England, after doing my diet and my oil and everything for the full month and being really, really good, I went away down to England to get a full body thermographic scan. And thanks to Rosa, I got results back from a team of doctors, and they said, you're clear. You've got no evidence of disease. There's no skull and liver lesion or anything there. So I was a very, very happy woman then. Very happy woman. I've been in maintenance dose on and off ever since then. So yeah, here I am now.
Well, so let me strike a little closer to home. Sir John Reynolds, who you may know as the personal physician to Queen Victoria's household, not only prescribed it for the Queen's menstrual cramps, right? but also hailed it as the most effective preventative and remedy for what we now call Alzheimer's disease, for which we have excellent scientific evidence now because cannabis helps prevent the accumulation of plaque in your brain. And there's good hard science on this now. So you can find a similar trail through medical history for literally dozens of ailments.
I think the most surprising thing I've learned about cannabis is the immense amount of good it does for people. Working as a medical journalist, I began to become aware of the fact that there was more and more evidence emerging. But it was only when I actually got involved in the campaign that I started to meet people who have some of the most terrible medical conditions, either diseases, often neurodegenerative diseases, things like Parkinson's or MS, but also people who suffer from things like spinal injury or injuries or deformities or things like stenosis or scoliosis. And you see these people who have intense chronic neuropathic pain, which conventional and very dangerous painkillers, usually opioids, barely touch. And you see how their life is literally completely transformed by the use of cannabis.
In the United Kingdom, cannabis is a Class B drug, meaning that a person in possession of cannabis could face up to 5 years in prison and up to 14 years in prison for supplying. This makes it extremely difficult for anyone that wants to use cannabis as a treatment. The United Patients Alliance has been set up to campaign on behalf of patients for legal access to medical cannabis to treat chronic conditions. Every year, the UPA puts on events to raise awareness of medical cannabis and to keep the conversation in the public consciousness.
Hi, I'm John Liebling. I'm Political Director of United Patients Alliance. We are a medical cannabis organisation. There are around about 1 million medical cannabis patients currently in the UK consuming cannabis because they find that better for them than prescription medications. And we support them. We've got about 10,000 people who we directly support. And we also lobby for change so that we can get legal access to cannabis therapeutics for the hundreds of thousands of people that need it. Every single one of us at United Patients Alliance is a medical cannabis patient, every single one of us. So I'm someone who's suffered from anxiety and depression for most of my life, and I've managed that adequately with cannabis. I mean, some years ago, unfortunately, I got onto the wrong side of the law for growing my own medicine. And that's kind of how I got involved. And United Patients Alliance formed a couple of years ago, it was 2014, and we're all patients. So our founder, Clark French, he's a multiple sclerosis sufferer. He was diagnosed when he was 24, and when he came across cannabis, he could reduce the amount of opiate medications he was on, the tramadol and the gabapentin, and he was able to replace that with cannabis, and he was able to stop using his walking stick. He was actually more mobile, and in fact he got so well, he helped create the United Patients Alliance. And so we're here raising awareness.
The United Patients Alliance started as just a small group of patients who use cannabis as a medicine, and we wanted to change the law around that because we were fed up of being persecuted and made to feel like criminals for our choice of medicine. What we actually did when we started trying to lobby and change the law, by accident, we grew up this really lovely community of people who are already using cannabis as a medicine in the UK. So now what we have is a really good online community where patients who are just starting out in their cannabis journey, they can come and learn from other patients about what strains work best for certain things, oil making methods, and all the sort of things that go along with that. And it's a really good, reliable source of information because it's patients learning from other patients. And we're creating a best practice within our community so that when the law changes, we will have the knowledge there ready to enact and help as many people as we can.
been told about 5 minutes ago by Messenger that it has passed. Absolutely, all the ayes have it. There were no people saying no to it. First step. I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you so much for being here. First off, the bill has passed. Yeah! We must now use this to lobby our politicians. You must speak to your MP today. Get your phone out, email them now. Let your elected representative know that you came here today in support of this and that you believe that cannabis needs to be regulated as a medicine. It doesn't matter who you work for, it doesn't matter what band you want to raise. What matters is that we're all here on the same page fighting for cannabis as medicine.
My name's Callie Blackwell and my son is Darren Blackwell, and in 2010 he was diagnosed with leukemia. 2 years later he had second cancer called Langerhans cell sarcoma. Subsequently he had 4 bone marrow transplants in 10 months to try and prevent either cancer coming back. And unfortunately on his 4th and final transplant he developed 3 catastrophic infections. He had no functioning bone marrow. And they told us that nobody'd ever engrafted after 50 days. And we got to day 46, there was nothing there at all. So we were sent to hospice and my son was given approximately 3 days to a week to live. Darren started to get very anxious because he was facing his death, planned his funeral, planned everything about it. And I decided to start administering a tincture that we'd made out of cannabis, mainly to alleviate his anxiety that he was suffering from, and they were also trying to give him a lot of morphine, and he'd made it very clear that he didn't want to die on morphine, he wanted to be compos mentis. So we started giving a cannabis tincture, and 5 days later his bone marrow kicked in at day 75 and he officially engrafted at day 104. They called him a miracle because they had never seen him before. He was on no other medications other than what I was giving him, which I had to keep secret because back then, I was scared of social services and losing my children, and now losing the one thing that, was helping Darren. I had this published in April of this year, and it's a full, complete story of the whole journey. It's not just about cannabis, though. Cannabis is, a tiny, tiny part at the end. I wrote it, hopefully, because I want to give people hope. I want to give people the chance to understand that there are other opportunities, there are other options. We don't have to just go with what they tell us. There are other ways, and Darren is proof of that, living proof of that, as are hundreds of people here today.
The bill is to reverse an error in a previous bill that said that cannabis has no medical value. The legislation on cannabis at the moment is an ass. It actually states that cannabis has no medicinal value, and this is contrary to the experience of 5,000 years of the use of cannabis in all civilizations in the world. But if we get through that and decide it has some medicinal use, then flowing from that is the possibility of the sale of various products that are already available. But the world's tide is turning against prohibition. And we've already seen the majority of states in America, 29 of them, have legalized medicinal cannabis. Canada is leading the way. Uruguay, a whole range of countries throughout the world are realizing that we need a new policy.
The UK has one of the toughest drug policies across the Western world, and we differ in particular from the USA and many countries in Europe. As we know, the majority now of US states now have legalized cannabis for medical use. Many have also legalized it for social use, but we're not discussing that here. A dozen countries in Europe now have legalized one way or another the use of cannabis for medical purposes. It's interesting that Denmark passed their law actually in November last year, legalizing medical cannabis. Germany passed their law through their lower house in January this year. We have Ireland with their law going through Parliament as we speak. So the move towards recognising the incredible medical value of cannabis is, I would say, becoming more and more rapid across the world. But the UK, no change at all. So we're really getting left behind here.
In a way, the Lib Dems took a risk. We went out and advocated for reform, and we sought to appeal to all those reform-minded voters who absolutely see the nonsense in the current position. We didn't get that case heard well enough in the general election, but in time, other political parties, I think, will see that public opinion has changed, and that increasingly the public think the existing laws are ludicrous, as they are.
Well, the most important thing about it, about regulating cannabis, would be to restrict access to children. And I mean, I'm a great admirer, and I would completely endorse the strategy that Justin Trudeau has adopted in Canada, where almost as in the same sentence as saying we're going to legalize cannabis, he says we're going to restrict access to it. And I think that is the way forward. Now, many people would argue that you don't need to restrict access to cannabis, and it should be treated like cauliflowers or carrots or tomatoes. And whilst I have some sort of emotional sympathy with that, I think you know, being pragmatic about it in the real world, that's not a sensible attitude. And there's no doubt that if cannabis does cause harm, and you know, again, let's be honest, cannabis can cause harm, only in a very small number of cases, but cannabis can cause harm. It's a psychoactive substance. To suggest it can't would be foolish. So if it can cause harm, then children are the most vulnerable.
I'm keen to give this place laws that make sense. At the moment, most laws are prejudice-rich and evidence-free, and the cannabis laws are irrational, unscientific, and do a great deal of damage. They actually increase crime, they increase abuse of drugs, and they waste a fortune. But the cruelest aspect of laws of prohibition are that seriously ill people are denied their medicine of choice. And there's an abundance of evidence that cannabis has a unique role to play, particularly in relieving the symptoms of a very cruel disease, multiple sclerosis.
We had a report on the medical benefits of cannabis undertaken by Professor Barnes for our inquiry, and really we rely very much on his report of worldwide research to talk about the issue of the specific medical conditions for which cannabis is most helpful. And what he found is that there is good evidence for medical cannabis for conditions like chronic and in particular neuropathic pain, in dealing with seizures, for example, in the case of people with multiple sclerosis, for epilepsy in young children, for example, and certainly for the symptoms of nausea, sleeplessness and so on that arise as a result of people with cancer taking chemotherapy. So there are those conditions anyway for which the evidence, according to Professor Barnes, is good. There are a number of other conditions where there is some evidence that cannabis can be helpful. It's truly remarkable, actually, the extent to which cannabis can help people with very, very different kinds of conditions.
Yes, I've been involved with End Our Pain since the early days. Basically, that campaign is designed to make cannabis legal for medical use. Without getting too technical, at the moment it's a Schedule I drug in the Misuse of Drugs Act. That means that it has no medicinal value, which is complete nonsense. There's overwhelming evidence that it does have medicinal value. Many countries around the world, over half of the American states, have now recognized its use and made it legal. So for the government to maintain that it's a Schedule I drug of no medicinal value is nonsense.
It's just the inertia in this country, and the prediction clearly in that article was wholly misplaced. Yeah. But I think in a way the difference between the United States and the United Kingdom is that they're much more devolved style of government, where states have considerable control over policy making in a whole range of areas, facilitates experimentation and innovation in lawmaking. And so you've had a few states going out ahead. I mean, California went out ahead on medical use of cannabis some years ago now and have now voted for legalization of recreational use. Colorado has had recreational use legalized for 2 or 3 years now. And as people see that it's worked, it hasn't led to a collapse of morality or law breaking or anything of that sort, then it convinces other states that they can try it. But in this country, it's all or nothing. You have to convince the national government to do it, and that's much more difficult.
In the US, cannabis is legal in 9 states for medical and recreational use. 30 states in all have passed laws allowing some degree of medical use of marijuana. California has a long history of fighting for legalization since the 1960s and gained huge ground in the early 90s with Proposition 215. Proposition 215 was conceived by San Francisco marijuana activist Dennis Perone in memory of his partner Jonathan West, who had used medical marijuana to treat the symptoms of AIDS. In 1991, Perone organized Proposition P, the San Francisco Medical Marijuana Initiative, which passed with 79% of the vote. Proposition P did not have the force of law, but was simply a resolution declaring the city's support for medical marijuana. Proposition 215 was enacted into law on November 5, 1996, by means of the initiative process and passed with 55.6% of the vote in favor. Since that time, the medical cannabis industry in California has had its ups and downs, but is now a thriving industry, adding billions to the state's economy. With the passing of Proposition 64 in November 2016, legalizing the sale of recreational cannabis for adults, estimates based on their current illegal market could mean that California could see a rise in over $5.7 billion in revenue from the legalization of recreational cannabis.
The ArcView Group issues a report every year on the international cannabis market. And we know that in the United States, cannabis, legal cannabis, is the fastest growing industry in the entire country.
My name is Joshua. I'm a manager here at Kush LA Collective. We are a medical dispensary in California, and we are here to provide great medicine for great patients. I'm a bud tender, or I'd be considered the manager here. It's like a bartender mixed out with some bud in it. When I first started doing this, actually, I remember walking up to my mom when I was 18 and telling her, "Hey mom, look, I'm a doctor." You know, I was like, I'm a pharmacist now. I was like, I prescribe medicine to people all day long. In the sense, it definitely is a medication. The way I look at it is herbal medicines. You know, there's people that do straight herbal medicines that are considered, you know, voodoo doctors, witchcraft doctors, whatever they want to be called, and all this other alternative medicine, like, you know, but they're still considered technically a doctor because it's the herbal medicine. It's the same thing. Cannabis is just an herbal medicine. So I definitely feel and relate that idea of us being doctors, us being pharmacists, because that's what we do. We treat people. It's like a bartender. You know, they say they have a bachelor's in psychiatry, right? That's how I feel sometimes when I'm here. You know, my patients come in, bad day, good day. They come in and talk to me. They tell me their problems. They tell me they're stressing about. And I recommend weed that I feel would be best for them. You know, sometimes people are having really bad days and they don't feel like talking as much. So they want something to mellow them out. Other times, some people are feeling really bad or upset that they just want to have something to make them have an uplifting feel. So you get something more of like a citrus or something that has a more upbringing feel to it. Originally, when it first came out, when it was medically, walk into a doctor's office, and you'd go into the office and you'd first talk to one of the receptionists, would probably be a very attractive woman, depending on how it is, because, you know, in California, there's a lot of backward doctors that, you know, just give out Rex like nothing, you know, like, oh, you're sleepy? Here, get some cannabis. But then there are doctors that actually ask you more, you know, thorough questions, that actually ask you, you know, what are your pains and your insomnias and stuff like that, to see if cannabis is best for you. And so it really just depends on where that person goes to get their doctor recommendation, which is really determined on the process. The change in culture, you can see it's a lot less black market. It's a lot more open. see a lot more cops, obviously just being more compliant with it, you know, just more in the sense of kind of just being accepting of it. It's a whole culture of like, you see even the older generation that used to call all of us drug users and drug abusers, you're even seeing them start seeing it, hearing about it. And you know, it's very big with the Hispanic culture that like, that's something that would be looked down upon and be frowned upon. I've heard also testimonies are just like, honestly, it's just about the naturalness of it. Like weed is very natural, but it's also if you feel sick sometimes, you feel crappy and sluggish, you need to eat better. You know, you need to put better things in your body. You know, weed is a better alternative to any kind of medicine you could be taking, because pill forms and all this other stuff that they add and all these, you know, gels and powders and stuff that break down in your body, like what's all that extra, you know, compared to just burning a leaf.
My name is Kenrick Mejia, aka Polly Rob, and I am a producer and engineer and co-owner of Local Astronauts. Local Astronauts is it's a company which consists of a collective of creatives that's coming together for, you know, culture rebranding, music production, video production, and we're really about advancing the culture as we see it and where we want to see it within the next, you know, couple of years. At 34 years old, you know, being I consider the business prime of my time. You know, before I never used to smoke weed at all. During my 20s, early 20s, mid 20s, I never used to smoke weed. In my brain, it was always a point of trying to just stay abrupt and be just the first person moving. And I felt that weed was the exact opposite of what I was trying to accomplish. You know, all of my friends, they smoke weed, which all due respect is great, not a problem. It was just for me, I didn't want to feel sluggish. I didn't want to feel like I was the person that would just forget things, or, you know, just kind of the cliche ideas of what you thought marijuana, you know, would do to you. And this is only just my natural ignorance of not knowing about marijuana. So, you know, fast forward, you know, to about a couple of years ago, you know, I'm getting off the plane after 18 hours of, you know, doing a session in Ohio. I get off the plane and I come back to my studio in Los Angeles. Another set of clients calls me about 3 in the morning, this is like my peak hours to either keep working or finish the day off, like completely finish the day. So they called me and they said, hey man, we're in town. We got off the plane early, we're in town. So they pull up to my studio and, you know, we proceed to play music, you know, talk a little bit about business or whatnot. And we're enjoying each other's company, of course, till about 5, 6 in the morning. So when they leave, they say, okay, we're going back to the hotel. We're gonna, you know, settle in, get some sleep, wake up, and let's continue to discuss whatever it is we need to do. So fine. So they gone. I proceed to lay down because now I'm in the studio. I'm not gonna travel home. I'm just not traveling home. So I sleep in the studio and I lay on my couch. And when I wake up, however my face was laid on the couch, it stayed like that, completely. Like it was my entire face was just shut in just to one facial expression, and it was droopy. My face was very droopy. So I'm trying to wash my face with water, trying to figure this thing out, and it just wouldn't go. So had to postpone the meeting. You know, went to the doctor, and the doctor told me I had Bell's palsy. And Bell's palsy is pretty much, in a nutshell, it's when your brain nerves don't react to your face nerves. So, you know, it's terrible, and it comes from lack of sleep, you know, inner stress that you don't know you have. You know, you can be working 18, 20 hours. If you don't allow your body to relax and tranquilize, you know, you can, you know, easily, you know, put your body into almost like a semi stroke. I had to take pills. I took pills for about 4 days of muscle relaxers. I just wasn't into it at all. So one of my colleagues suggested that I smoke marijuana. You know, they asked me, they said, have you ever tried smoking marijuana to, you know, relax your nerves? And I'm like, no, I don't smoke. And they're like, you should definitely try it. Like, this is something that can eventually turn into a major stroke if you don't treat it properly. I thought about it for a minute, then, you know, other options of cannabis lotions, taking edibles, some things like that. So I started to smoke, you know, to smoke marijuana, and like literally immediately after, my face would it would twitch a little bit, and then it would formulate itself for me to be able to speak a lot better. And like even now, like you can still see bits of my face that are still working itself out. And it works a wonder. It really puts my face back into normal, along with, of course, proper eating and facial exercises. It allows me to kind of get everything back into motion. And I just had a newfound respect for what marijuana does. I have a totally newfound respect. And then, you know, after doing a lot more homework, social media is just open. So after doing a lot more homework, I started to figure out that it's just so many health benefits for cannabis, you know, and I'm definitely appreciative of being able to have the opportunity to even get myself back to normal. You know, the average person, if they're not on medication and they have a Bell's palsy or a cerebral palsy or mini strokes or, you know, different diseases or symptoms, like, you know, some of them are so far gone they don't have the ability to get back. It's just like their body is at that point where it's a breaking point. So I was lucky to be able to have the privilege of even having the opportunity to get back, and you know, and it's changed the whole way I kind of look at how I enjoy and endure life as well. You know what I mean? So it's a beautiful thing for me now.
So I was inspired to open Harborside by the lack of a really responsible professional dispensary. When I came to California, there were dispensaries that had been started by activists, which were very amateurish. And there were dispensaries that were started by people who really just wanted to make as much money as they could, as quickly as they could. And they were ugly and scary. So I wanted to create a gold standard for cannabis retailing to show that when this activity is done with intelligence and integrity, that it can bring benefits to communities instead of harms. The whole idea of Harborside from the beginning was to create a truly responsible, professional cannabis retail environment, someplace that was really worthy of the plant. And so we set out from the beginning to sort of create a temple to cannabis. Harborside started as a family business. As we've grown, it's become bigger than my family could manage, and we are now, you know, growing into a real company, a real corporation. But we always work hard to maintain the same sense of caring about each other and for each other that you would see in a family that we've always had here at Harborside. We don't want to just create a new business or even a new industry. We want to create a new kind of business, a new kind of industry that smashes the old models and is really like committed to building the kind of world we all want to live in, a world that has sustainable practices in it, a world that reflects the diversity of human beings, a world that's fair to everybody and takes care of everybody. And so we try to do that here and model that world we want to live in.
The 4-year experiment in Colorado. Cannabis was first decriminalized in Colorado in 1975. Though it was still illegal, it was not a criminal offense, meaning that you could not go to prison for possession. Only a civil fine could be imposed. In 2000, the 20th Amendment to the state's constitution made cannabis legal for medical purposes. Anyone with a doctor's prescription could now access cannabis as a medicine. In 2014, Colorado legalized recreational cannabis in the 64th Amendment to its Constitution. Since that time, adults over 21 can legally smoke or ingest cannabis on private premises. Also, people can grow up to 6 plants and travel in-state with up to 1 ounce. The Colorado Department of Revenue showed that recreational and medical cannabis sales reached $1.3 billion in 2016. 8 out of the 12 months in that year reached over $100 million in revenue, which yielded nearly $200 million in tax. 2017 saw a rise to around $1.8 billion in revenue. As the rest of the United States is seeing a rise in crime, Colorado is seeing a decrease in serious crimes such as homicide and robbery since legalization. Cannabis use in 12 to 17-year-olds has decreased significantly, but adult use, especially those over 50, have skyrocketed. Drug-related deaths have decreased due to the decline in opioid use and other hard drugs. In 2017, 3 years after legalizing cannabis, Colorado had the lowest unemployment rate in the country at 2.3%, the lowest since 2001. In 2015 alone, the state's cannabis industry created 18,000 new full-time jobs. Cannabis turns out to be a stronger economic driver than 90% of the industries active in Colorado.
My name is Pepe Breton, and I'm the owner, CEO of Flora, which is a chain of retail stores in Denver, Colorado. At the beginning, I was in corporate America, and I was kind of tired, and I always wanted to do my own business. And at the time, I was searching for, what I could do business-wise that I can be my own boss. And at the time, this whole medical marijuana movement was going like crazy. And I said, hey, if drug dealers can do it that are not so smart, I'm sure I can figure out how to do it. So at the time, I partnered up with a friend of mine that grew tomatoes. And the one thing I knew is that if you can grow tomatoes, you can grow anything. So I partnered up with my friend, and I was like, dude, you know how to grow tomatoes. Let's start growing marijuana for medicinal purposes. And yeah, it just kind of started from there. It took a $30,000 investment to what we are now. Really, recreational was what took marijuana to the next level. Because back then it was just about 100,000 patients, and you have hundreds of dispensaries. And once it became recreational, now you're talking millions of people, millions of tourists. So now it really has become a legitimate industry that creates millions of dollars in tax revenue and hundreds of thousands of jobs now, and really has helped the Colorado economy tremendously. Yeah, no, I think the best statistic that I've heard is, as far as crime coming down, they used to say that April was the highest month as far as crime rate goes, and now with 420 being April 20th, they said this last year was the least crime in the month of April. Definitely, yes, marijuana has taken some share from, drinking. So maybe the people that were drinking then, now they're smoking. And, typically when you're going to be smoking, you just want to sit at your house and relax. You never see anybody, trying to get violent or crazy or, ballsy. They're just, cool, chill people, want to relax, happy. So that's a huge positive when you think about marijuana versus alcohol. So yeah, definitely marijuana has definitely changed. I would say maybe not the world now, but definitely has changed Colorado. There's no way that without marijuana, Colorado will be where it is, which, we're one of the top states as far as growth and real estate. And I mean, we see thousands of people moving every month from different states, and probably have about 100 employees. Out of those 100 employees, 70% of them, they come from different states, and they come because of this industry.
The United Nations meeting last April, the United Nations General Assembly special session on drugs turned global drug policy on its head, and that was an incredibly important meeting. What the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime representatives said was that evidence-based public health policy on drugs is here to stay. The relevance of this to medical cannabis is that, in our view, there is now adequate evidence to show that patients should have access to cannabis for medical purposes. The UN are saying, let's have evidence-based policy. In my view, they are therefore saying, let's have legalization of cannabis for medical use. They haven't actually said that, but the implications of what they said about evidence are very clear to me, and I feel the UK should therefore act.
We need to regulate all drugs, not in the interest of the pharmaceutical countries, but in the interest of those who are vulnerable, who are taking them. And certainly, if when cannabis is on sale here, there ought to be regulations to prevent its use by children, by pregnant women, by people with mental health problems. What we need is cannabis that can be used without being mixed with that hideous, toxic killer drug, tobacco, which has been responsible for so much harm in the world. And we can do that. With a legal market, it can be used as a food, as a drink, as a vapor. It doesn't need to give you a high to have its medicinal effect. So that's the way the progress will be made. But at the moment, scientific research is inhibited by a law that restricts research and restricts its use in experimental ways.
This whole subject area is packed full of hypocrisy. The fact that probably a lot of government ministers smoke cannabis at a younger age, and yet are happy to condemn their fellow citizens to a criminal record and the consequence of blighting those people's careers. The fact that many of those ministers will drink significant quantities of alcohol, which we know, in terms of an objective assessment of harm, is significantly more harmful than cannabis. And indeed many of them will smoke as well. So there's hypocrisy everywhere to be seen, and my plea is for us to base our policy making and our law making on evidence, not on fear and anxiety and prejudice.
I said to my MP a year or so ago, in a constant sort of lobbying situation with him, I said to him, why can you not just place the responsibility in the hands of doctors? You know, doctors, we trust doctors, they're trained, they're professionals, you know, we rely on them about all aspects of our health. Why can you not just give it to doctors and say, you can decide whether or not to prescribe cannabis? And he said to me, yeah, but the trouble is, if we did that, they'd prescribe it. Which is almost like something, it's almost like a Yes Minister script, you know, I mean, it's just ridiculous. But that's the sort of bigotry and intransigence that we're up against.
I strongly think we should decriminalise cannabis use. There's a lot of people who would benefit from it. If you think of all the thousands of people in this country with chronic pain from various causes, all those people with muscle spasm from endless causes of stroke and brain injury and multiple sclerosis, let alone those who have anxiety or epilepsy or nausea after chemotherapy, the numbers are tens of thousands of people, tens of thousands who could benefit from cannabis. At the moment, we're forcing them into the criminal market. We're making them criminals. There are one or two compounds that you can legally prescribe, but they're of rather limited value in terms of their usefulness for certain specific conditions. But generally speaking, those who use cannabis for medical reasons are criminals because they have to buy it illegally. And I think that is appalling. It really is time we change that, and we're behind now the rest of the world in terms of the number of countries who are looking at or have already legalized cannabis for a whole variety of medical conditions. It's time the UK government caught up with world opinion and world evidence and decriminalise cannabis for medical use.
I think it's hypocritical to oppose the use of cannabis, even for recreational use, but particularly for medicinal use, while happily allowing the populace to kill themselves with tobacco and alcohol. And whilst in the case of politicians enjoying taxpayer-subsidised alcoholic beverages in the House of Commons bar and pocketing profits from their association with pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies who oppose legalisation because A, this plant is more effective than the drugs that they produce and supply to the health service at exorbitant prices, and B, because they can't patent a plant. I think the world is twisted.
The crazy roller coaster journey that Billy has taken me on over the last number of years has flagged up a really important issue that is happening within our country, within Ireland and within the United Kingdom for me as well. And with 710 Holdings, MME, and naming the CBD oil after Billy's bud, we are entering into a project where we want to open research facilities here in Ireland and throughout the UK. First and foremost, obviously, the legislation has to change. Medicinal cannabis has to be legalised for medicinal purposes only. Research facilities, we have to be allowed to go and do this. We have to be allowed to demonstrate what tincture or what strain of the medicine is appropriate for what condition. What's been allowed to do all that within the UK and Ireland, we should be able to move on then and pump money into the economy, pump money into our hospitals and into education and create more jobs. It really is a must. But for me, in my opinion, Billy has now been on medicinal cannabis for just over a year. For me, the deal is done. It's already legal. So I'm really not, I don't see the debate. I don't see the discussions. My word and what my message to the politicians and to the doctors in our country, look, let's just get on with the job. Let's get this done. Billy is the proof in the pudding. Medicinal cannabis has given me back my right as a mummy to hope. But the most important thing in the midst of all of this is medicinal cannabis has given Billy back his right to life.
My experience tells me, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm 69. I've got 10 grandchildren. I've never taken drugs. But my experience tells me that this works medicinally. I believe that the politicians should take notice of that. I'm not on my own. You know, there are lots and lots of people, if you look on the internet, who've had the same experience. And I know that's only anecdotal, but what we need is, we need everybody to get together, and so that they've got lots of us telling them that this has worked for me, and they need to change things. They need to legalise it for medicinal purposes.
It's a plant. It's a plant. I just think it's ridiculous. It is a plant. Whoever decided that plant should be illegal, they should be shot. And I think our government are being highly hypocritical, because GW Pharmaceuticals, well, they pay our government for growing in this country, don't they? And I've heard it's about 200 plus ton of medical cannabis that they actually grow down in England, but not one part of it's left in Britain for any patients. It's all shipped to other countries in the world for medicinal purposes. That's what makes it so highly. But we need to wonder how many of them have got shares in GW Pharmaceuticals.
So one of the questions I'm always asked is, why is this criminalization policy, this failed public policy, why does it continue to be perpetuated? Why does it continue to exist in America and quite frankly around the globe? And while I can't speak directly to the motivations of those that are advocating for the continued criminalization of cannabis, you'd have to ask those people yourself what their motivations are. My suspicion, having done this work for so many years, is that The criminalization and stigmatization of cannabis and the users of cannabis is not so much about the plant itself. It's an outgrowth of a broader and ongoing culture war, where you have one segment of the population, typically a segment that is in political power, targeting another segment of this population. Again, typically those that are poor, those that are ethnic minorities, those that lack political power. And it's always been about one segment of our population targeting the other and attributing certain cultural beliefs that they have, negative beliefs and negative stereotypes, and applying them to these other segments of society, and using cannabis as a way to be able to exert political and legal pressure upon those segments of society. It's not about cannabis per se. It's about the stereotypes that revolve around those who certain segments of society believe use cannabis. And that's really what this is about today, and that's what it has always been about.
I can well understand that some police forces decide that there's a better use of their time in chasing serious criminals rather than in arresting people who are using cannabis. My hope is that all police forces would decide that if they find someone using cannabis for a medical purpose, that they would simply turn away. And the more we can do to persuade police forces of that approach, the better for these poor patients who are suffering so much and for ridiculous political reasons cannot get hold of medical cannabis to help them.
We have 5 objectives. I'm not sure if I can remember them all off pat, but the first one is to end the prohibition of cannabis, as simple as that. The second one is to promote, as a matter of urgency and compassion, the prescription of medicinal cannabis by doctors. The third one is to introduce a system of regulation and supply for adults about cannabis to remove the market from the control of criminals. The fourth one is to educate about the benefits of cannabis, and the fifth one is to encourage the production of industrial hemp. So really, we're interested in ending the prohibition of cannabis in total, but it's undoubtedly the case that the most urgent necessity is to deal with the medical issue.
When you look at the neuroprotectant qualities of cannabis, and actually when you look at mental health around the world, 2 of the most popular reasons for people to consume cannabis is anxiety and depression. And we're not talking about clinical anxiety and depression, we're talking about that which gets you down every day. The kind of thing that you'll have a beer in the evening because you want to calm down before you go to bed, you got your mind spinning and all that. There's no doubt that it's therapeutic. And in some ways it is medicinal to everybody, whether they happen to be using it recreationally, whether that's what they call it, or whether they actually have a medical condition that they're treating with it. So we take the view that all cannabis use has therapeutic value as long as it's being used in a safe and responsible way, and as long as you know what it is that you're using, how you're using it, what the risks are, and that's kind of where we're coming from. What we're fighting for is to gain access, legal access for our patients. Our personal belief is that a medical reason to access this medicine is of primary concern, and that's why we're fighting for it specifically.
This cannabis movement, right, it's a global movement. Every living creature on the planet has an endocannabinoid system except insects. So every human being on planet Earth has an endocannabinoid system. Every human being can benefit hugely from this medicine. We have a natural right to this medicine, right? Mother Nature made us to use it. Our bodies produce it themselves. So it is a global movement, and we're just beginning to get the laws in the shape that we want them to be in the United States. There's a whole world of reform waiting, and so my message to people of good conscience anywhere is that the time to deal with this issue is now.
Well, the amazing things happened. I'm actually in remission. So here I am, no treatment of any sort, no chemo, no op, no radiotherapy, just CBD oil, and I'm in complete remission. Lymph nodes are all back to normal. I feel great. I'm the only person I know who hasn't had a cold, and I'm convinced that that's the oil that just balances my body and makes me feel well.
To date, Billy is the only person within the United Kingdom and Ireland to have a prescription on medicinal cannabis. Billy's neurologist in our main hospital in Belfast, they agreed to support Billy and write his prescription. So Dr. Brendan O'Hare has been our family GP for many years, wrote Billy's prescription. And 710 Holdings MME, who were supplying Billy his medicine, now supply it through Billy's prescription via the NHS.